Well, good day. This is Dr. Branch. This is the lecture video for my Christian ethics class here at Midwestern Seminary about artificial reproductive technologies. I have an enormous amount of information in this slide deck. I will not be discussing every slide. I will be emphasizing the points which are most important for you as you think forward to the exam. And of course, those points that I test are the things I think are most important for you to know as you move forward in your ministry to basically have a critical awareness of artificial reproductive technologies. This is such a very dynamic science that some of the things the Feinbergs say about the topic are now out of date. So it moves forward very rapidly. So let me talk to you about a few things regarding artificial reproductive technologies. So we want to mention Nadia Suleiman. She's a good example of what people think of as sometimes the worst case scenario. She was single, divorced, and the mother of 6. And in January of 2009, she gave birth to 8 children which had been conceived via IVF. What that means is she donated her eggs, got a sperm donor, had the embryos implanted within her, and then gave birth to all these different children. So some folks show this as the example of the deepest concerns that many people have with artificial reproductive technologies. And then just on the popular front, Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, beautiful Nashville couple, both from Australia, and Keith Urban, an amazingly gifted guitarist and songwriter, but they've had a child, and I think now 2 children, by using a surrogate. And this just sort of the thing that people do, and it seemed to be something that people celebrate. But the question is, should we be doing these things? It's possible to create 8 embryos and implant them in a single mother, but should we? It's possible for a beautiful celebrity couple to use a surrogate, but should they? Those are the sort of questions that we're asking here. So what I would tell you as a guy raised in the country is that, to think of it this way, the methods associated with artificial reproductive technology have jumped the fence from animal husbandry. Many of these technologies were originally invented for the field of animal husbandry. I have some friends up in northern Missouri that work at a lab that all they do is create embryos of cattle, sheep, and goats for different industries. So those sort of technologies were developed first there for, this is a bull that you're looking at there if you don't know, but developed first for animal husbandry and now are used in humans. Here's a definition I think is helpful. Artificial reproductive technologies, ARTs, can be defined as any treatment, technique, or procedure that involves the direct manipulation of human eggs, sperms, and embryos outside the body for the purposes of establishing a pregnancy or pregnancies. That's a robust definition. Why do people use them? First of all, here in the United States at least, if you will remember some things we talked about earlier in class, we noted that fewer people are getting married, and when they do get married, they are waiting until later to get married. If you remember, the average age for a male at first marriage here in the States is 27. For a female, it's around 25. So the challenge is the 20s are actually a woman's most fertile period in life. So if women are postponing marriage till halfway through their 20s or until after their 20s, then women just get less fertile as time goes along. So basically the data says that a woman's fertility declines after age 27. If many women aren't getting married until age 27, then you can see how infertility might be an increasing problem. Also, I would point out that this is largely the effect of contraceptive, because people are able to postpone getting pregnant, they postpone getting married. So infertility in women is caused by many things. One of the most common causes of infertility in women is scarred fallopian tubes. In many cases, not all, in many cases, but not all, scarred fallopian tubes are caused by poorly treated sexually transmitted infections, most significantly pelvic inflammatory disease. So again, I do mean to be so kind to people struggling with infertility, and I want to preface what I'm about to say by asking you to listen closely as a student. I am not saying that everyone who is infertile because of a sexually transmitted infection. That would be inaccurate, and if you say I said that, you've misquoted me. It's not my point. It is the case that sexually transmitted infections are strongly associated with infertility in women, and so what we are driving at is that a culture that lives in promiscuity, that has one, or that promiscuity is a strong contributing factor to the increase in the demand for artificial reproductive technologies. It's not the only cause, but it's a strong contributing factor. So we've already talked about this. This just gives you a diagram showing you some of the things a lady might run into. And again, scarred fallopian tubes. I don't know why they call that the uterine tube. That's a fallopian tube. Polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, fibroids, infection, just all sorts of things can cause. Oh yes, and then there's sometimes even structural problems. A woman might have a uterine septum. You see this growth that comes down here in the uterus. This would make it difficult to conceive as well. Infertility of men, about 30 to 40% of the cases are related to men. This can be low sperm count, no sperm count, retrograde ejaculation where the ejaculate doesn't actually emerge. So there's all sorts of reasons. Again, this is a diagram showing you the most common one in the States, at least, is scarring of the fallopian tubes. This just gives you an artist's depiction of what that might look like. Here you have low sperm count under the microscope. You can see that there are fewer sperm here in this sample. Ovarian cancer, a desire to avoid birth defects. So the idea is by creating embryos in the glass, then one can tease out the cells from an embryo, do a genetic test, and see if there's going to be a problem with it, and then choose to discard those embryos if you don't like what you're seeing. A new social agenda, lesbians, homosexual male couples use surrogates and ARTs to have children. Just a quick example. Here's Elton John with David Furnish, his partner, I guess they call each other husband, with a surrogate child. And I don't know who supplied the sperm, but they got the egg from somewhere else. They got an egg from an egg donor, or they bought it from an egg bank, and one of them provided the sperm, and now they call this baby their child. This guy, Kyle Gasson, was a homosexual male in England. He created a child via IVF with an egg donor, and he provided his own sperm, and then his mother served as the surrogate. So we get into some incredibly odd arrangements in these things. He's now legally the father of his own brother. Sometimes people want to use these technologies for sex selection. Sometimes the children are created for research. So the data out there is that in 2015, the CDC, this is the latest data I can find, the CDC said in 2015 here in the States, about 7.4 million women had used some form of IVF, but that's all across the board. Doesn't mean they all did I said some form of IVF. That's incorrect. Some form of ART, including IVF. So artificial insemination, there's basically two terms I want you to remember, and that is artificial insemination by the husband or artificial insemination by the donor. In artificial insemination, the sperm is placed inside the woman using some medical devices. And the question is, where does the sperm come from? Does the husband provide it and then it's used with his wife, or does it come by donor? And by donor, it doesn't always mean the donor is doing this altruistically, just giving away the sperm, but frequently selling the sperm. Sperm are bought from a sperm bank. So that's the question. This just shows you how it's done, intrauterine insemination. So in vitro fertilization, remember there's several forms of artificial reproductive technologies. In vitro fertilization refers to conception that occurs in a laboratory apparatus and not in a woman's body. The sperm and egg are joined together and conception occurs in a petri dish. In fact, the term in vitro is a Latin phrase that simply means in the glass. And here you see this happening right there. The egg are being fertilized by sperm in a petri dish, and then a human embryo is created. Don't want to talk about the history. How is it done? First of all, the woman is given drugs to cause her to hyperovulate, and then the eggs are harvested intravaginally. You see the ultrasound probe placed into the vagina here, and then this small needle passes from the vagina all the way up to the ovary, and they guide it to collect the eggs that way. It's actually fascinating that that's able to be done. Sperm are gathered via masturbation. Either the husband does this, or a donor does this, or they're bought at a sperm bank. That's how they get them. Then conception occurs when the sperm and egg are placed in a glass together. And then implanting them. Typically, they're allowed to grow to about the blastocyst stage, and they're transferred to the mother. And so the experts who do this like to try to implant 2 to 4 embryos at one time to have a better chance of one of them actually implanting, which is why you have this frequently. People with using IVF will have lots of babies at once, like Suleiman. This is a diagram showing you how all this happens. You can look at this on your own, but it just gives you an idea of the process that goes through for someone to actually, here's another diagram basically pointing out the same thing. So you can have a conceptual idea of how this process works. So I'm not going to talk about these different items here. I do want to talk about selling gametes. So what you have is a market for human cells, and these are human reproductive cells. Frequently, egg banks will solicit young college women, particularly smart and beautiful young college women. And some of these are actually sold for research. There's no intention to bring the child to term. The gametes are sold to create human life that will be destroyed in the lab. And what you need to know is the increased risk associated with egg donation means that women are typically paid much more to donate their sex cells than men are. If you go back to that slide and the way that the eggs are collected, you can see that there is some risk involved for women, and with men, not so much. So men are typically paid about $100 for a sperm sample. Women can be paid more than $5,000 for a single cycle of egg collection. So this just gives you an idea. Here's an advertisement looking for beautiful young women to come buy and sell, or you can come buy these eggs from these people who are beautiful and smart and all those sort of things. So let me say a quick word about surrogate motherhood. Here's what I want you to remember out of this. This is going to be testable. There's basically 4 types of surrogacy. So surrogacy, genetic surrogacy, occurs when a woman, imagine you have a husband and wife, they can't get pregnant for whatever reason. They get another woman, and the husband donates his sperm to be artificially inseminated into this woman, and so then she conceives a child from the father's sperm but her own egg, and then the child is given back to the couple. This is called genetic surrogacy because the surrogate is actually donating an egg out of her body. There's also what's called gestational surrogacy, which is where you have a husband and wife. They can't get pregnant, but eggs are harvested from the wife, sperm from the husband. They're placed in a petri dish in vitro. Then those human embryos are placed within the surrogate mother, and all she's doing is providing a womb for rent, if you will, for 9 months, and she carries the child to term, or the children to term. This is gestational surrogacy. Commercial or contractual surrogacy means the surrogate is paid, and then altruistic surrogacy means that someone says, well, I just want to help you guys, I'm going to do this for free, I'll carry your baby for you. So those are 4 different categories you should be aware of and be able to differentiate. Probably some sort of multiple choice question on the final or something like that about those. So here's just a picture of these happy couple who contracted a surrogate, and this is the way this is presented. I will tell you, it doesn't always work out so pleasant and so nicely. But here you see this beautiful young woman, the slightly older couple, and they've contracted her, and they're sipping coffee. And if you'll notice, there's a sonogram pictures right there, and she's checking her list. It's interesting. I wonder what she's checking off there. What are you doing each day to take care of yourself? So as of 2017, gestational surrogacy cost, if you're going to pay someone to do it, around $100,000, and of that, the surrogate's going to take home around $30,000 to $35,000 here in the United States. And let me tell you, this is a real enticement for a lot of young women. An Uber driver once in, was it Fort Worth, Texas, or Dallas? Dallas, Texas, One of the more awkward conversations I ever had, this Uber driver started telling me how she was thinking about doing gestational surrogacy in order to raise more money to pay off her student loans. And she had no idea that she had a Christian ethicist in the back seat, and I tried to give her some of my advice. Perhaps she listened. So legal status differs from state to state throughout the USA. It's illegal in contractual surrogacy is illegal in New York but legal in California. And it just differs from state to state. It's illegal throughout Great Britain. That's the difference between a federal democracy and a unitary democracy there. So scoot on to all sorts of arguments for surrogacy, why people want to do it. Hey, altruism, we're trying to help people. Allows the genetic mother to keep her good looks. It's some women, they just, pregnancy is not medically advisable and they want to have a baby. Two things I would say is, these two go together. It's morally permissible. A lot of people are going to say, it's my body. Why can't I do what I want with my body? Arguments very much like abortion. And they're going to say, well, you say this is dangerous. What about the guys that built the Golden Gate Bridge? They're falling into San Francisco Bay and dying. That's dangerous as well. So here's some arguments against surrogacy. You can see them there, but I would just say it dehumanizes the person. And we're treating mothers like a baby growing machine instead of a human. I would also say surrogacy, you better be very careful. This is, you're combining sex cells in someone else's body. That looks a lot like adultery. But what I would say is, to a degree, this reminds me of slavery. Not exactly, but to a degree. And in slavery, one human owns another human and uses them for purposes desired by the owner. And basically, in surrogacy, you're owned by, at least in contractual surrogacy, you're owned by someone else for 9 months. There's all sorts of moral concerns related to ARTs. I'm going to stress one. You can read about the others, and that is spare embryos and the sanctity of human life. These IVF clinics want to create lots of embryos all at once, and then they want to implant several of them, but they'll keep some in reserve. And what happens is a couple will get pregnant, and they're so happy they're pregnant, they bring a baby to term, and then a year or two later they say, well, wait a minute, we've got all these other human embryos off in cold storage. What do we do with them? We shouldn't treat human life that way. The sanctity of human life principle says human life should not be treated that way. This is my single greatest concern with the whole issue of in vitro fertilization and artificial reproductive technologies. So I say a lot there, and along with that, sometimes when a lady has 3 or 4 children implanted at once, the physicians will come back and say, you need to do what's called selective embryo reduction. And what that means is partial, we're going to abort 2 of these babies and we'll let the other 2 live. So again, we're bumping up on the sanctity of human life principle over and over and over again with artificial reproductive technologies. So I will tell you my advice about ARTs and some of the things that I would warn you about. From a Christian perspective, I don't think couples should create more embryos than they intend to implant. And I don't think you should use a sperm or an egg donor. I really think surrogacy is an extremely bad idea. And I realize this goes against the grain of our culture, but my concerns are related to the sanctity of human life and the sanctity of the family and the sanctity of treating other people with dignity. We don't treat them like a slave, someone that we buy and use their body for whatever purposes. You can read my notes for more detail, but I want to stress the pain of infertility is real. The Bible talks about this. Just think about Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1. I think this artist did a good job capturing the anguish of a woman who very badly wants a baby. So our challenge today is, in this culture, to acknowledge to infertile couples, we know your pain of infertility is real, but Jesus loves you and God loves you, and there's still moral paradigms and moral guidelines which need to be followed. And just because we have a deep pain of infertility doesn't give us the moral right of way to do anything we want just to have a child. I hope this has been helpful to you, and you can read my notes for more details. Godspeed, and I wish you every victory.